Well, welcome everyone to the panel. And for those of you joining us here for the conference for the first time for this panel and for this session, welcome. And we're just so glad to have you here for the biannual Catholic Social Tradition Conference, hosted at the Center for Social Concerns here at the University of Notre Dame. My name is Ben Wilson, and I direct the Center for Social Concerns Summer Service Learning Program. I'm pleased to facilitate this afternoon's session where we'll hear from four deeply faithful, humble, honest speakers about their walks trying to bring the gospel to life. And in the spirit of welcome, just two brief announcements about accessibility. We're grateful to Melissa for serving as an ASL interpreter for this afternoon's panel, and with all the other sessions. Viewers can turn on or off the closed captioning at the bottom of your screens for accessibility. The conference this weekend commemorates the 50th anniversary of the document Justice in the World, written by the United States bishops. And in that document, the bishops articulate the church's growing awareness throughout the second half of the 20th century that to profess faith in Christ commits us to work for justice in the world. In other words, that listening to the gospel means both listening to the word of God as well as listening to the cry of the poor. The bishops remind us too that Jesus often spoke of the gospel as good news. But what does that mean in our own day when the headlines throughout all of 2020 were a seeming torrent of bad news? What power does the gospel have in the here and now? What difference does the gospel make? So it's a real joy then to welcome four speakers who I think receive far too little attention in the headlines as they're out on the front lines. People who bring the good news of the gospel to life in their own lives. So we'll hear from founders of nonprofit organizations to young professionals to lifelong community volunteers and mothers and fathers living their vocation both inside and outside the home. The stories we'll hear speak to just some of the rich tapestry of witnesses in this work of living the gospel. We'll hear from the panel for about the first half of our time together, and then leave plenty of time for conversation. We'd love to hear from each of you. So first then, I'd like to introduce Brad Grabs, who studied accountancy at the University of Notre Dame, later was a high school theology teacher, and he now devotes himself full-time to living and working in the urban core of Kansas City, the educational nonprofit organization that he founded in 2002. So welcome, Brad Grabs.
Thank you very much, Ben. It's really a privilege and a pleasure for me to be here today and to share with you a little bit. I just really appreciate the opportunity. You know, I was formed a lot by experiences at the Center for Social Concerns when I was a student at Notre Dame. And I really began to believe strongly in the church's teachings on social justice through those experiences. And I saw that as a way to share the good news in some way as well. A couple of years after graduation, I had the privilege of teaching social justice as a class at Rockhurst Jesuit High School in Kansas City. And in that class, we studied a lot of the church documents, including Justice in the World. And while I found those documents to be very inspirational on lots of levels, I began to feel a call to do social justice rather than just teach it. The thought that kept coming to my mind was, how does one bring these documents to life? And specifically, how do these teachings impact my life and my calling? And I struggled with that question for a couple of years, really. And as sometimes happens, God gave me the inspiration and a very interesting push in the direction I needed to go in October of 2000. I was living in the urban core while I was teaching at Rockhurst, and I was out on a walk in a nearby park near my home on a Sunday afternoon. And long story short, I was mugged and assaulted by two teenage boys. A difficult experience. I wasn't hurt badly, but it left me really fearful and kind of angry for a while. And yeah, it was a difficult experience. But I found this strength to pray about that and to reflect on the experience and to discern that experience as well. What did God have tell me in that, or why did that happen to me? And so I eventually left Rockhurst High School at the end of that academic year, and I started the Learning Club as a small program in the urban core to help youth get on a better path. And I did that for about 10 years part-time while I had other work part-time to supplement my income. And now we're in our 20th year of operation. So we've grown a lot in that time. Now we serve about 300 students, and with after school and summer programs, kids kindergarten through 12th grade. Most of the kids that we work with live in public housing facilities. And we do that because we know that a lot of the kids that live in public housing are marginalized in lots of different ways. We also have a high school internship program in which we recruit and train students from our urban core high schools to serve as mentors and tutors for our younger students. And one of the goals of that program is to inspire some of those teenagers to study education as a career and to return to this community to teach in our schools. You know, our focus is a lot of it's academic. We try to fill in some of the gaps that our students have. It's very important. But really, it's a lot more than that. It's about giving students a positive and a pivotal education experience so that they can truly know their gifts and their goodness. That's really what's at the core of what we do. And when I think about the Gospels and how that has kind of inspired our work or led us on this journey over the past 20 years, the one that the Gospel passage that continues to inspire me is from John's Gospel, chapter 10, verse 10, when Jesus says, "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." And you know, most of the students that we work with know the thief pretty well. Sometimes the thief is in the form of gangs in their neighborhood where they feel unsafe. Maybe the thief is in the form of a bully at school. And maybe the thief is even somebody who resides in their own home. So a lot of our students know the thief pretty well. And so what I see as our role at Learning Club is to share with them the abundance of life, again, so that they can really know and appreciate their gifts and their goodness. So we try to be in some way the hands and the feet and the eyes and the ears and the mouth of Christ to our students. And up to this point, we really haven't done that through explicit evangelization. And part of that is because we work with a lot of refugee kids. Some of them are Muslim and come from lots of different backgrounds. So we try to be that presence of Christ in the way that we interact with the students and share our care and concern and love with them. But I will have to say that after doing this work for 20 years and seeing our students grow into adulthood and start their own families, you know, I wonder sometimes, does our formation of our youth go far enough? Have we shared the gospel fully enough with them? Should we be more deliberate and explicit and direct in sharing the gospel with our students and their families? One thing that often comes to mind as I reflect on this is a paragraph from Pope Francis's Joy of the Gospel, right? When I read it years ago, paragraph 200 really stuck out to me, and it continues to kind of haunt me a little bit. And so I want to read that for you just briefly. Paragraph 200, Joy of the Gospel, says, "Since this exhortation is addressed to members of the Catholic Church, I want to say with regret that the worst discrimination which the poor suffer is the lack of spiritual care. The majority of the poor have a special openness to the faith. They need God, and we must not fail to offer them His friendship, His blessing, His word, the celebration of the sacraments, and a journey of growth and maturity in the faith. Our preferential option for the poor must mainly translate into a privileged and preferential religious care." So that to me is I wonder about that. I reflect on that a lot, and I wonder if we're, you know, doing enough. And so I I'm very open to different ideas. And so I come to you in this conference, not as only as somebody who's sharing insight for sure, but somebody who's seeking insight as well. So thank you.
Excuse me. Thank you so much, Brad. Thank you for your honest sharing. I'm so struck by that phrase you said of, haunted by this line of Pope Francis in that call, and your clear posture of having heard the gospel, trying to live it, and continuing to try to live into those questions as well. But it's a lifelong journey. So next, I'm very pleased to introduce Nicole Watts. She's a collaborator of ours here at the Center for Social Concerns on many different projects. To the point even where once last week, a coworker of mine said, we'd love to get a great community leader to speak to our students on this issue. What about Nicole? I said, literally, she's speaking on something else at that same time. So she's just so generous and has so much wisdom to share. So she serves currently as founder and CEO of Hope Print, which she founded herself in 2010, with the mission of unifying diverse communities rich in culture and connectedness to prosper in place. Nicole lives in the heart of the North Side neighborhood of Syracuse, New York, where she and her team open up their homes and lives to the community around them for family empowerment programs, collective community advocacy, and collaborative neighborhood activation. So Nicole, welcome.
Thank you so much, Ben. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. I am always excited to participate in anything that the Center for Social Concerns has to do. And one of the things that I really appreciate about each time that I interact with the Notre Dame community, most especially the Center for Social Concerns, is the way that they beautifully interweave this concept, this calling of the gospel into the life that I live in my everyday life, and hopefully all of us in some form or fashion live in each day. And I think that this question of what the gospel really is, and then therefore how do we live it out, is one that has divided the church over centuries. It is one that ever plagues us throughout our whole society, most especially among Christians and those who see the world differently. It is easy to be a divisive thing. But I believe that the gospel, the heart of it, is actually one of the most beautiful, potentially unifying, empowering, life-giving things that exists in all of the world. It is the story of Jesus. And to live out the gospel is no harder than to look at the life of Jesus and follow in his footsteps. Ben explained a little bit about our context, but to set a little bit more, Hope Print and my own home, I'm sitting in it, is in the midst of Syracuse's North Side, among the North Side that is home to the majority of the resettled refugees and new Americans that live here in our area. We've got about 15,000 plus that call this community home. And again, most of them are my neighbors and many are my friends. They live in the community with people like me who are descendants from previous immigrant groups from Europe, mutts, so to speak, as well as a number of BIPOC people, Black, Indigenous, people of color from all different backgrounds and stories. So it is one of the most diverse contexts I've ever come across in my entire life in a mid-sized city. And we make up a very large percentage of the population in this beautifully diverse place. And similar to what Brad said, our context, living out the gospel can be a bit of a complex thing in this type of environment. We have folks that are coming from a variety of different religious backgrounds, not only denominationally within Christian religion, but also a number of Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists, all layered on top of each other, both literally and figuratively, in apartments and places within our community. And so when I first moved into the neighborhood as someone who's oriented to my faith, that Jesus and the calling that is placed on our life through the gospel and through Christ is really what drove me into the work that I now get to do with my life. The question of how to show up in that way was a big one. And I knew there was a lot of sensitivity. A lot of, especially the resettled refugees and new Americans that called this place home, had to flee their homelands because of religious persecution and struggles. And so to, even just simple things like have a cross in your house would trigger some conversations and some potentially traumas that could be very difficult. And so we just took the approach of living our life as people of love and welcoming our neighbors and soon to be our friends into our homes and lives. And as we did that, we started with just some dinners, and people started to pour into our doorstep. I did a head count one day, and we had 95 refugees and new Americans in our home, and 40 American-born people that had just found their way for dinner on a Tuesday night. It was crazy and chaotic and beautiful and impossible to describe unless if you had been there. But there was something that was consistently present every time that we opened up our home in this way. And it was just this thing I can only explain as love. And there was one gentleman who was from Iraq that showed up at our door, and he was one of those fierce personalities that exist in our world. One might say I'm one of those too. And he walked in on a mission to figure out what this place was all about. He had heard rumor that I was a Christian, and so there was kind of some word on the street around, what in the world we were up to. Were we trying to convert people? And he just watched the whole night. And he walked up to me at one point and took his finger and pointed it right into my face and said, "Are you a Christian?" And I felt concerned because of all of the things that are concerns in our community in terms of what that could mean. But his response when I said, "So yes, I am, but please tell me, how do you know that?" And he softened and he said, "I can tell by the way you love people." And there for many weeks to come, a week wouldn't go by without this gentleman showing up at our doorstep on a Tuesday night for dinner with another family and saying, "This place, these are the real Christians. They love people." And, I think that really encapsulates what I believe we're called to live out in the gospel. In our society, there's a magnetic pull of capitalism and these kind of independent social pressures that drive us towards this outputs mentality that we need to have programs, we need to fix problems, we need to have these deliverables, and certainly having checks and balances to make sure that the things that we're doing are really making the impact that we want them to and that the people need them to is important. But not when it loses this piece of presence and relationships, most especially when we say that we are following after Jesus, because Jesus called us to a different way. And many times, I must say, that costs us something. When you're driven by dollars and deliverables, that's a thing that if we grew up in American society, we are already so oriented towards as a nation, as a church, and as people. It's very easy for us to see dollars connected to this capitalist idea that if I invest this much or donate this much, I ought to have a say in where it goes and or see this particular output. And if I don't, then maybe it's not being meaningfully invested. But again, Jesus called us to a different way. And so when we orient our lives around the sexy story, a number of times that I have throughout this work where people are giving or volunteering, wanting to get that photo out because they want to tell the sexy story. That's just not what I see in Jesus. In fact, the people that were looking for that were wanting this fame and power that they thought that Jesus should be looking for, he was quick to send them away. He healed the sick. He spent time among those who were of the most need and did not care for and sent away the camera op of his day. When power began to be a thing that was emerging, he did not capture it and claim it as his own. In fact, he had all the power in the world and he didn't lay claim to it. But he turned over tables to underscore the fact that there are systems at play in the society then and certainly are today that are oppressing those who are the poor, those who are the most vulnerable among us. And he, as Jesus, Creator God, among us as human beings, as we were created in the likeness and the image of God, believes in the innate and profound image of God that is invested in each and every person. And so as he spent time among the people, it wasn't to be charitable. It wasn't to somehow make a good name for himself or get the right media attention. It wasn't to get a roof over his head. He denied having one. It wasn't to get food in his belly. He depended on the tables of others, but rather it was to live out in declaration, I believe, to all of us as humanity. This is what the gospel looks like in person. And so I believe that as a people, especially, I don't know who you are, but those of us who tend to have a Zoom link and know how to access it, who show up to conferences in the middle of a day on Friday and don't have to work our normal job every hour of the day, those of us who access education like Notre Dame, we tend to be people who have privilege that gives us power and influence access. And we know, if we haven't learned anything in the last couple of years, we certainly know that those power and influence elements are out of whack, and that it is our task, I believe, as people who have unjust levels of privilege, that we need to leverage that towards systemic change, because we're just human, but all the more because Jesus, who had all the power in the world, was not magnetized towards that. Rather, he gave it up and instead was magnetized others towards him through love. We have to remember and redefine what the good news is. The church has had an unfortunate history up and down throughout society that we tend to gravitate towards this idea that the good news, the gospel, is the amassing of people towards some kind of a cause or something that's external and or heavenly. But rather, I believe that the gospel is the good news lived out. It's the image of God manifest through all of humanity, that we are set right in the way that God intended things. So we have to redefine what we understand the gospel to be in order to embody it, to be justice, love, generosity, community, a place for those who may have no place, so that the love of Jesus might be known. And so wherever you find yourself in life, maybe you don't have to have the intimidating moment of someone's finger in your face asking you, are you a Christian? But I certainly hope that all of us, that is how we are known ever increasingly. That if we wear the name of Christian, we pursue the life of Christ, that how that manifests all throughout our life is to be a people of love and of justice.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I noticed that at one moment, I think Melissa is doing it, is far outpacing the translation and the closed captioning, but at one point, the closed captioning inserted in place of, these are the real Christians, it said, these are the real questions. So I want to take this as an opportunity to, if you do have any questions, feel free to add them, and if you see down the bottom of your Zoom screen, either under the ... more, or it'll say Q&A. Feel free to add those, and we will have time for questions and conversation following the four panelists. So just wanted to mention that now. So as questions arise, feel free to add one there, and we will look forward to discussing that at the end. So next then, I wanted to introduce Emily Archambault, a graduate of Ball State. Emily has been serving at Camp Sharing Meadows near LaPorte, Indiana, as camp coordinator since 2017. In that role, she coordinates all aspects of camp, including inviting campers, scheduling staff, planning meals and activities, ordering supplies, establishing themes, and leading value session Bible studies at each session, in addition to running marketing and rentals department for the Share Foundation. That's a full PD. Emily, I had not known her, and this past summer, there was one common thread among a number of the students that I was working with, and everyone just kept saying, Emily. Emily is this miracle worker. She's doing incredible work with adults with disabilities in this time when so many services are shut down, and the way that she was using Zoom and other opportunities to connect really meaningfully in life-giving ways with her campers. So I'm pleased to welcome Emily.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Archambault, and I am so glad to be here with you. It is absolutely wonderful to be speaking to 73 individuals, many of whom I don't know, but I want a special thank you to my campers that showed up today, along with my family and friends. It's amazing to have you all here. As Ben said and gave me so many gracious words, I am the camp coordinator, camp director for Camp Sharing Meadows. And Camp Sharing Meadows is a branch of the Share Foundation, a nonprofit for adults with disabilities. And we are a Christian nonprofit that was founded by Father Blaney, a very unique priest who in the 1950s decided that people with disabilities should be able to receive the sacraments, go through confirmation, and accept Jesus, have a full life. And that is what started all of the work that I did. He started a camp, started a residential program. Now I have a job because God spoke through him. And in my job at our camp, we have adults with disabilities. They're the most wonderful human beings I've ever met in my entire life. And every day we focus on the gospel. And it's most evident in the stories of our campers. I have 3 of them. The first one I'm going to share about is Michael. Michael is a great camper who is nonverbal and doesn't speak, but you can see what he's trying to say through his actions. And one day, Michael decided to wait until people were getting ready for bed, and he got out of the camp building. We're out on 186 acres of land. It's very easy to hide. And when any situation like this happens, in a blue moon, must I say, we have to do what we need to do. We have to call the police, we have to search, and this was scary. Anybody would be afraid. At a certain point, our executive director took me aside and said, we need to pray. Get all of your staff to pray that Michael comes back. That was one of the most incredible moments of my life. I saw Notre Dame undergrad students, along with other camp counselors, pray for the first time, or pray for the first time in over 4 years, crying out to God, saying, God, will you bring Michael back? And then one of us felt led to say, God, you love Michael so much that you can bring him back to us without the police or anyone else being involved. You could have him walk right back to the end of the camp building, the back of the camp building. As soon as we prayed that, less than 2 minutes later, we all stood out in the back of the camp building. Michael was walking back to us alone, of his own free will. Another story that I have is when we had undergrad Notre Dame students last year. If you didn't know, we're in a pandemic. And in a pandemic, there are things that we just can't have or are very hard to do. It's difficult to run a summer camp when we have a pandemic going on. And I was the only one that could be employed. God graciously gave us 4 awesome Notre Dame undergrad students, one of whom I know is listening right now. And I am so grateful for them because they helped us run a summer camp for free through Zoom for our camps. And the one thing that I'll always remember is when a camp counselor came up to me and said, you know, I thought that I would be able to help out these campers. However, they have helped me out so much more and gave me a reason to live. And the last story I have is about Vicky. Of course, I've changed all of these names. I should have said that earlier. Vicky was another nonverbal camper who had so much life inside of her and brought so much joy to everyone who was around her. Vicky unfortunately passed away in 2019. And I went to her funeral and her viewing. Campers and I spoke about her life and her testimony. And Vicky's death led her father to say something to the entire group. What her father said was, I believe that God has been trying to find me all of my life, and I just haven't been able to listen. And now I know I want to see my daughter when I die. I'm ready to accept Christ. Vicky's aunt came up to me right afterwards and said, "Do you know that your camp is the doorway to heaven?" Why? The gospel is so clearly seen here. And it's so clear that we get a glimpse of heaven through the doorway of camp. All the stories that I told you about show the good news of the gospel, and it's so simple. Maybe you need a reminder of it from when you were a child. Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to him belong. They are weak, but he is strong. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. John 3:16. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. John 15:12. God loved Michael so much, he brought him back to camp unharmed and of his own free will. God loved our counselors so much that he showed them he heard their prayers. And God loved us so much that he gave us an even better security system afterwards. God loved our campers so much that our camp program continued through a pandemic. And as a result, the campers loved the counselors out of their deep love for God. And God loved Vicky so much that her life became a testimony of God's love and her father became saved. All of these campers have disabilities. Another part of the gospel is that people with disabilities are not a mistake. I repeat, people with disabilities are not a mistake. When the disciples asked Jesus why a man was born blind, and if it was because of sin, Jesus responded, "This happened so that the glory of God could be seen in him." People with disabilities, often seen as weaker and more childlike, are actually used for God's glory. I needed to realize this. And it's what brought me to the gospel. I'm not a mistake. God loves me regardless of my personal disabilities. So God loves us regardless of our abilities. I want that realization for every person on earth. It's what brought me not only to my job, but what influences every part of my life. I see it at work in the campers and staff when they comfort each other. I see it when campers help each other wash their hands. When my staff allow themselves to realize they are no better and no worse than my campers. And this realization often happens when we sing "Jesus Loves Me" at camp. We are weak, but he is strong. We're all disabled in our own ways, but Jesus loves us anyways. My personal challenge for you, a call to justice, a call to action. Next time you see a disabled person, may you recognize that you are no better, no worse than them. Instead of offering to push a wheelchair, start a conversation. Get to know the person. As Jesus said, love each other as I have loved you. And in the eyes of God, we're all worthy of the gospel. We're all worthy of his love. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you for sharing your powerful testimonies and for your own example. And lastly, but not leastly, I'd like to introduce and welcome Kathy Bago. Kathy Bago was among the first cohorts of the Holy Cross Associates when she served in urban and rural Chile in the mid-1980s. And subsequently, Kathy has worked with refugees and immigrants in a wide variety of settings and has been deeply involved in her local Grand Rapids, Michigan community, where she's raised her family and where she continues to ask herself hard questions about what living the gospel means. So please welcome Kathy.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me today to speak to you and with you. We've benefited so much from our involvement with the Center for Social Concerns and in so many ways. I believe that each of us has a call and we all have a mission in life. We just need to listen to God to discover it and to value our own unique paths. Being a mother is a solid bedrock, the treasure that I have discovered under my own feet is the core gold in my life. I had not, however, always planned on being a full-time parent of 5 children. I still fret whether I should have had a more remarkable career, perhaps working overseas or for a nonprofit organization. I have gradually grown into my vocation and believe that helping my family, laying the groundwork for volunteers, and making connections between people with different resources in my community is my answer to the gospel's call. After graduating from Notre Dame and spending sophomore year in France, I was very curious about people around the world. First, I served as a Holy Cross associate for 2 years in Chile, along with my now husband, Jack Schneider. I worked for Catholic Relief Services in Haiti for a year, and then returned to the US to work with refugees and immigrants in Virginia. These formative experiences then motivated me to undertake graduate studies in cultural anthropology and influenced how I approach family life now. My husband, Jack, myself, and our 4 kids have lived in Grand Rapids, Michigan since 1994. As part of our local Notre Dame club, I find nonprofit service sites for 3 college volunteers from Notre Dame as part of its summer service learning program. For several years, I gardened with children as an outdoor educator at Cook Library, a dynamic urban hub. In various ways, I support the mission of Sparta Health Center, where my husband, Jack, is medical director. His vocation as a family doctor there to provide low-income people with healthcare, including Spanish-speaking farm workers, has been central to our family's life. In a sense, I was surprised by my vocation to be a full-time mother. I feel that God gave me this mission was deepened with the birth of each of our 5 children, and I am truly grateful to all the people that helped me become a better parent. I had help along the way. I discovered that I love watching tiny people grow into toddlers, then into teens, and then into adults. Each child is so very different and unique. As parents, you want each child to feel deeply God's love for them, and then share that love with other people through small acts. Our oldest 2 boys, for example, would take cookies down our tree-lined street to an elderly neighbor who later called to report that yes, the cookies had been delicious, and yes, a few bites had been taken out by the tiny messengers. You hope that your children see God's joy in people that are very different from them, of other colors and other ways of life, but that they're not afraid of that difference. Jesus reached out across social boundaries to work with the Roman centurion and the Samaritan, and I feel he wants us to reach out to our other neighbors, even if we are in more affluent or homogeneous neighborhoods. The world begins at our doorstep, and it came inside every night as Jack came home and shared stories about his patients. We also took our kids along to big baptism parties of the children of Hispanic friends, and to the end of migrant season parties, and to volunteer. Learning and loving a large family can sometimes be quite lonely. I lost my spiritual balance at times and felt like I wasn't doing enough. Comparing my quiet call with the accomplished friends and their exciting careers was a demoralizing and paralyzing temptation to which I at times succumbed. We may need to recognize the value in our seemingly ordinary missions as our own sincere and best response to living out the gospel. I recently rediscovered how good it is to join with others, to let go of control, and to learn from the neighborhood experts. In early spring, students from Cook Library plant summer flowers each year in 4 beds behind this urban community center, along with Notre Dame volunteers. It's a jubilant, chaotic occasion as kids dig big holes and dangle angleworms. For the first years, I very carefully selected the flowers all by myself. Then Senora Dominga and I began to garden together. Dominga originally comes from Guatemala, like many of the library neighbors. Together, following her lead, we designed the spaces and bought the flowers. As we tag teamed to water and weed, Dominga's vision came to life and complemented mine. With the sunflowers she planted, the gardens reached new heights of beauty. The highlight was when 2 neighbors walked by and told the head librarian, Miss Sue, our friend, that the garden now made them feel like as if they were home. Their words were, "Este jardín es tan hermoso, me recuerda a los jardines in Mexico." Their words were, "This garden is so beautiful. It reminds me of home gardens in Mexico. I smile whenever I see the beautiful flowers, and I watch the monarch butterflies dancing from flower to flower in the sun." Sometimes I have found it hard to give freely as Jesus urges us in the Bible, as God gives to us with palms outstretched, heaps running over. Should I write the prettier card or save it, donate those extra shirts, commit to volunteer, or grasp it all back for me, for my children? From personal experience, I know that people need so many things. Sometimes, though, I want to evade those voices by becoming busy. Many people have taught me about generosity, including my own husband, Jack, who fights the good fight with the cheerfulness of a long-distance runner. He rises early each morning to travel north to care for his rural patients and stays out late at times to deliver babies, his greatest joy. The respect that each of our children feels for their dad surfaces in their college essays and motivates them to include volunteering alongside their business careers. Small acts of giving create channels in our heart through which God's generosity flows first to us and then through us to other people. Abundantly blessed in my own life, I also rely on the love of family and friends to hear God's call. I like to think of the verses of Luke chapter 9, 1-6, when Jesus sends out his disciples 2 by 2 to cure the sick and proclaim the good news. As best as we can, and with God's grace, we can encourage each other and our children to hear God's call and then to live out the gospel without bringing extra bags, extra money, or bread, but relying on God's strength to carry us through. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to speak how God works through my life.
And thank you so much for sharing, Kathy, your own example and the questions you've continued to wrestle with. So that concludes our 4 panelists. And now we'd have some time for some questions and conversation. So I wanted to share a comment, a beautiful comment from Marianne, who said, "Emily has made my son's life bearable since this pandemic and has continued to allow my son to stay close to others, even though we live so far apart. Love, Emily." A beautiful note. I couldn't help but pass that along. But I do discern a question in there as well. I think many of us have noted the kind of the terrible paradox, in the pandemic of this invisible thing that in some ways affects all of us, right? The nature of a pandemic. And also we know poignantly, more and less poignantly, that it affects some populations much harder than others. So I wondered if we might start with Nicole, if you might be willing to speak to that, of the ways in which maybe COVID has made some people's lives even more difficult to bear. What are some of the challenges you've seen, and what's also some of the resilience that you've observed in this time?
Absolutely. I think often about at the very beginning, when all of us were kind of in the freak out looking for toilet paper zone, how I had a friend who walked up to me and asked, how's your community doing? And I responded to him, we have a lot of toilet paper in our community because our community goes through crises almost as a daily thing. They've been there, done that. And so there is an incredible resilience that I have witnessed not only in the very beginning, but ongoing, that my friends and neighbors, they're ever searching for the solutions and opportunities and how to continue living life in the midst of a crisis because they're so practiced at it. And so they've been just a really beautiful example to me. And I think as I get the chance to share those stories with others as well. I think about the other day, one of my Congolese neighbors brought me some soup. I myself have long COVID. So I've been very sick with it over the last 3 months. And they have all these African remedies. And so she showed up, she sent me videos of how to make it, and all this food showed up at my doorstep. And so it really honestly has been so much more of them teaching me in this season and others of us that get to live in this community. But on the flip side, as you mentioned, there's so much that has been highlighted. I often like to say it's not as if the pandemic caused these systemic issues, it's that it highlighted them. And so the issues around food access, around healthcare inequities, around housing, that's a big one that's about to unfold, we think, in a tremendous way, is a housing crisis across the country, as lifts on kicking people out of their houses, evictions come to bear, and people are owing back rent, and just so many things that have been piling up, is going to be a very challenging thing amidst our community. And so those of us who have reserves, who've had the luxury of living beyond living wage, so we had any money to put into a savings account, have a little bit of a cushion. But those who use every dollar, it is just, every dollar counts. And so when those dollars aren't there, when those resources aren't there, it has a profound impact. Not only, I think, too, is important to underline for today, but for years to come. it can have such an impact on people. So I encourage all of us as a people to kind of be aware and cognizant of that as we walk out of this, around what does it look like for us to make sure that people don't fall off cliffs that are going to take years to climb back, so that we can all as a community be stronger and better together.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you for speaking to both sides of that, the resilience as well as the current challenges and the long-term ones, to keep our eyes on each of those aspects of this. Emily, you've received another affirmation here that I want to pass along. I'll read it just verbatim. Hey, this is Bart, one of Emily's campers. I love her so much, and she helped me to come to her camp, and how she loves the Lord and loves her job. I'm so blessed to have this camp of hers and have her in my life. I love you so much, Emily. I feel like I shouldn't put you on the spot to even respond to that verbally at the moment, but I also would be remiss to not give you a chance to respond. But it does seem like love is a very real reality at your camp, and that it's continued to flourish even in this time of distance. Just wanted to see if you wanted to comment at all on how you've kind of witnessed love in this time of COVID.
I can definitely do that. Thanks, guys, for the wonderful compliments. Y'all made me so emotional. But yeah, love is something that I'm so grateful to have experienced through my job, through the campers, through so many people even outside of that. There are ways that if you look for love, you see it. We can't give hugs right now, but that doesn't mean we can't send an encouraging word to a friend. We can't go visit each other and be in person, but that doesn't mean we can't love each other by sending a card. And it has been an absolute pleasure. I'll never forget when I went to go meet, I'll just say Marianne's son, because she didn't say his name. It was the first time I had seen him, and I gave him a box, because for our virtual camps, we get to give a box, and they go through all of the awesome activities together, arts and crafts, Bible study, it's all there. First time I saw him, I'm all garbed up, I have hand sanitizer, I have everything. He comes through the door, I pull my mask down, and I'm like 20 feet away. I say, this is Emily from camp. He had never met me before, and he went right up to me and grabbed my hand. I will treasure that story forever. And that's just one example of the love that I have felt through the camp. And it's not just because our campers are so loving. It's not because I'm loving. It's because Jesus's love is shown through us. It's him in us towards you. And I want to thank all of my campers that are going to probably send nice compliments for being involved in my life. And thank the Share Foundation for letting me have this job, and for Notre Dame giving me this platform.
Thank you so much, Emily. We had a question as well from Jacob saying, how do you feel the fruits of the Spirit are most evident in your mission and work? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. I thought maybe we could start that question with Brad. I think you posed a really sensitive and thoughtful question yourself, in that ongoing discernment of what's maybe the next chapter for the Learning Club. And you've seen many, I would imagine you've seen maybe some of those terms we just heard listed, maybe in an implicit way, and that continued wrestling. So I'd love to hear you maybe speak to how you've seen some of those goodness and how you might hope to further cultivate it.
Yeah, those are all really wonderful gifts of the Spirit, and we have seen those in a variety of ways over the years. The one that kind of sticks out to me, I guess, is faithfulness. To me, one of the things that we do that I think is lets people know that we are people of with a relationship to God is our faithfulness to people who are the most difficult to be faithful to. And I'm thinking of some of the kids we've had over the years who, a lot of times it's tempting to talk about really success stories, and we have some of those, you know, kids who have done well and gone on to college. But I also like sometimes to just tell the stories of kids who have not done so well, but we've stayed with them, you know, and I still, even years and years afterwards, you know, we maintain a relationship with them, and we still have hope. We still are faithful to our belief that this is a good person, maybe has made a lot of bad decisions, but we're going to stick with them and support them as much as they'll let us. And to me, I think that that's one real sure way of identifying our Christian values and our Christian roots, is because, you know, it's a lot of those fruits of the Spirit could be identified in, you know, any kind of good person or any kind of good work. But the faithfulness of sticking with somebody, and I think of, you know, we're almost to Easter, thinking about how Jesus stuck with us through the worst of the worst, you know, stuck with all human beings, and didn't abandon us, didn't walk away from our craziness and ridiculous behavior and sinfulness. I think if we can manifest that faithfulness to the people who maybe are the most difficult to stick with, you know, that to me is a really a good testimony of our Christian values. And I hope that we can really do that with the kids who need it the most.
Thank you so much, Brad. A question for Kathy. You spoke over a range of different involvements you've had in your own local community there in Grand Rapids. Do you have any suggestions for others on the call who might be looking out for opportunities? What are some of those ways that you found good ways to get involved in your community? Where are the places to go, the kind of questions to ask? But suggestions for people who might be starting out that journey, looking for ways to get connected. Kathy, I believe you might still be muted.
One thing to do is to think of what it is that you absolutely love to do. Like I don't like to cook. I love to garden, and so it's a great link with people in you know, across all walks of life, taxi drivers, people you might meet. And so if there's a place, if it's a skill you have or something you would like to learn more, look for other people who might want to join in with you, and people from other neighborhoods or communities from yours. And I think also it's like keeping an open mind. It's almost like networking to volunteer, something like you might even bump into it. You'll be somewhere and you'll hear about something that someone's doing that's so neat. Like I ran into someone who was doing migrant legal aid. And they go actually out into the camps, and they meet people, and they check on the housing situations, but they're also trying to talk with people and dialogue with them. So if you're aware in your daily life and keep your ears perked up for something that might be a good match for you, and one thing leads to another, and maybe you know that this might not be good for you, but it might be good for your friend. I guess those are some ways. Also, I suppose if you have a faith community, that's a way. But I guess looking to branch off onto the one opportunity you already have, and then keep talking to everyone and seeing if they might have some ideas for you.
Thanks for those suggestions, Kathy. Brad and Nicole, I'm sure you field volunteers frequently. Do you have suggestions as well on this question?
I would go right off of what Kathy just said. You know, our organization's name is Hope Print, and people often ask me, what does it mean? But it's this idea that each of us have been entrusted with a unique imprint of hope to leave on the world. And I underline that word because I think so often when we go to volunteer, and or as organizations, we look to host volunteers, we have slots we're trying to fill, instead of taking the time to sit with someone and figure out what do they bring to the table. You know, how might God have been at work through their whole life, through things that may or may not be on their resume, that are going to be able to show up in a unique way to meet a particular need in our community. So, you know, while we certainly do post, you know, come help out with tutoring, for example, trying to do that more interview process so that we could work with a person to discern their unique imprint of hope and plug them into those places where they'll both find joy and bring, you know, the things that they can bring to our community and our people.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, we try to also match our volunteers to the needs of our kids. So we do mentoring, you know, with the kids, and it's so important for kids to have somebody that they can look to at a personal level, at a professional level. Sometimes a student needs somebody and a responsible adult in their life who looks like them. Sometimes they need an adult who has the same interests as them, who just connects with them at a personal level. And so I think it's really important to you know, everybody, I think, can have a role to play in bettering the life of another person. And so, you know, if you can find the right place to plug in and use your own uniqueness and talents and gifts to connect with somebody else, it's a wonderful gift.
Thank you, Brad. Nicole, going back to something you shared in your original panel presentation, when you talked about that tension of, you know, the metrics and the inputs and outputs, we had a question kind of on that same theme, underscoring the language in Catholic social tradition talking about subsidiarity, right? This idea that there are some things that are germane to be done at the most local level possible, should be done there. And correspondingly, there's also responsibilities that higher levels of organization, government, or large organizations need to provide support when it can't be done on a more local level. So applying this idea of subsidiarity to the kind of work that you've each described, this person asks, does your organization struggle with influences from outside forces? And if so, what are some best practices for how to deal with such a tension?
Absolutely. So, you know, I think one of the most important aspects of the work, as I mentioned, I've lived in my neighborhood for almost 11 years now. And if I didn't live here and walk the streets and have a daily, you know, when the bed bugs are spreading throughout the neighborhood, they're in my bed. When the gunshots are going off out the window, they're in my neighborhood where I sleep at night. You know, the good, the bad, and the ugly is a place that I live in. And so I'm more connected to that local community and local needs. But otherwise, the outside forces I was referring to, that magnetism towards the outputs, the deliverables, the dollars. And honestly, a lot of times with, you know, quote unquote, the best of intentions, you see the needs. And so you want to see those needs addressed. You see the broken systems. And so you start showing up at new tables. But it's just so extremely important. And I think this pandemic has really underscored that in my own life. That, you know, I was locked inside my own apartment, like most of us in New York. At least we were all kind of forced to do so for the last year. And so I wasn't with the people. And it's just such a profound difference when people are in your life, when you are present in the local community to really know the local needs, the local conversation, the local story, and be a part of it yourself. Otherwise, we're just so naturally inclined towards, you know, that the outside forces sucking us in. And so I think it's extremely important whenever I talk to college students, you know, about they're going into policy studies or something like that. That's always the biggest thing that I'm always preaching to them is, you know, it's important to impact policy. It's important to sit at tables. It's more important to get the folks that belong at those tables and never get invited to get to those tables. But those are all important things. But if you don't have a kitchen table and you're not sharing life with people, then you are going to quickly be sucked into the system and become part of the things that undermine community and love and the things that I believe that we're called to.
Thanks, Nicole. had a related question as well on funding and kind of some of those other forces. It's a question about I think it was for Brad in particular, but how you might anticipate funding or attendance or attitudes towards the Learning Club, how that might change for better or for worse, or in a nuanced way, if the organization did take a more kind of explicitly Christian sort of approach or presentation of the gospel. Then a suggestion here to look at Bible or worldview studies such as Anchors Away. I wanted to pass that along. If you have any thoughts on that.
Nice. Yeah, that's a great question, and it's yeah, it is something that I've thought about. I think most of our supporters, we are very blessed in that we aren't funded by grants very much. Most of our donations, what sustains us, are individual donors, and it just so happens that most are people of faith, and our biggest donors are people of faith who have a heart for young people in the urban core who really want to be a part of our work. And so I think for them, they would be very supportive of attempts to be more explicit in our sharing of the faith. One thing that's been interesting for me is as we have gotten bigger and we've expanded, our staff is also very diverse. And so I think, honestly, I think there would be some, it would be a little bit harder sell among our staff, to be honest. And not that, everybody on our staff are great people. They're just people from different backgrounds and different perspectives on life and on religion. And so, that's, I think that's part of, the issue that we would face. But I think, that there's a real openness among our supporters to do that. So.
Thanks, Brad. Another question on this theme of the diversity and encounter. Pope Francis talks a lot about the work of evangelizing, and in the attempt to bring the gospel, there's often in that an invitation to receive it in ways that can be surprising and to be challenged and changed by that attempt. And so Peter asked this question and mentioned Nicole in particular, but Peter asks, how have your experiences with so many different people from different faith traditions enriched your own understanding of God?
This is a beautiful and always a dangerous question because of how we often feel about our own religions. I think I've been really humbled a lot by the encounters that I have had because they have taught me things that I always would have had drawn different assumptions around how very much we have in common. One particular encounter that I had that has marked me for forever is a girl who lost her parents in the midst of the conflicts in her home country. And she was left essentially with the responsibility of her younger siblings who were now orphans. And they had some special needs in their families and different kind of issues going on. And she has just borne so much. And she was in my car one day, kind of at that crisis point, but always just carried herself with so much strength and grace. And she just started to talk about all the ways that God has shown up in her life. And she's sitting beside me, wrapped in her beautiful hijab. And I know and understand that her God, she typically calls Allah, and that she follows after a religion that, Christianity and Muslim nations have gone at war, because of religious things. And so it's no secret that there's a lot of tension typically in those conversations. And yet, as I sat with her, she drew me so powerfully back to the way that God is so powerfully faithful. Just last week, I was on the phone with another friend from the Muslim faith who just testified the way that God is so faithful. And so while I don't want to get into theological conversations, here, I think the one thing that I do draw from that is just this reminder that the God, at least what faith I believe teaches, is that our God is creator God. And he created man, woman, and child with the image of God in them. And that shows up in so many profound and beautiful ways. And so that I believe has just really continues to amaze me at how, irregardless of even if we believe that there is a God, that God is powerful and strong enough to just still show up in so many ways in our world, with or without us. And so they teach me that on a regular basis.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks for sharing that story. Maybe to come back to Kathy, it seems like your own story is similar, of really being drawn to conversation and relationship with people from different cultural heritages, whether it be you going abroad internationally or seeking out immigrant and migrant working communities in your own area. What about that kind of cross-cultural sort of friendship has been enriching and meaningful for you and for your family?
I think the fascinating, wonderful thing about life is there's so many different answers across the world to the great questions, like who am I, who are you, what is life about, what is religion, what is God, and we have one set of it in our little world, in our little corner. But then when you bump out of it a little bit, if you open yourself up, you can learn so much, and then you can realize that our answers, the way that I see things, or may have been brought up, that they aren't the only human answers, that humanity is so broad and it's so rich. And so some of what Nicole was saying with her Muslim friends, you kind of enlarge all your spaces and your mind. You know, if we have the luck to meet people who are different from us, and that we can listen to them and can hear, so then it can kind of enlarge our own minds as to what we can possibly fathom it as what is possible answers or solutions to our great challenges. That's very abstract, but it's I think very true, and that's what's so wonderful, and I think actually true about why we should seek to be in diverse communities like Nicole does, or be with people who are different from ourselves, because it's a source of great growth mutually. Usually, though it can be scary and certainly has often resulted in conflict, but it is potentially the source of great enrichment. Yeah, and I've always found, I think one set of my grandparents came from Europe, and I always found that so interesting. And then when you drive by in the highways, a little girl, I remember wondering, like, what are all those people doing in their houses, and how do they do things, and what is that like? You know, or when we had the chance to, reading is such a wonderful way to travel as well, just opening up our spheres, you know, beyond getting on a plane and going somewhere. So, and that's the one thing wonderful about kids, is kids' books, and that's what Brad's doing. That's, you know, with his work. So.
Thanks so much, Kathy. Well, I think we are reaching time. So to just conclude, just wanted to end by saying just a profound thanks to Brad and Nicole and Emily and Kathy for sharing your own stories so beautifully and with so much humility. It's clear that you have received inspiration along the way and have been attentive to that. And it's also clear that you continue to allow yourself to be open to questions that challenge you further and onward. So thank you for sharing your own example with each of us, and whatever stage of the journey we're each on. I think there's something that many of us can take from what you've shared. And I also want to thank Melissa for her just beautiful work of listening so thoughtfully and attentively to every word as it's been shared, and that work, that generosity of sharing it and making it accessible to others. I think there's a metaphor in there, I think, for the work we've been speaking about writ large. So a special thanks to Melissa as well. So I think with that, we are all wrapped up, unless there's a word from Bill or from anyone else at the center.